What's shaking, everybody? It's another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas football YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson today. First of all, happy weekend, everybody. It's Friday. So hope everybody goes into the first weekend of June and has themselves a good time if the weather will allow us to do so. But real quick, Anwar, before we tell everybody to like the video if they like it and to subscribe to the channel, and I guess I just did that, subscribe to the channel. Before we hop into UT football, real quick, NBA discussion. No LeBron, no Steph Curry for the rest of these playoffs. It's a brave new world in the NBA, and I get a sense that this KD Greek freak battle in this next round of the playoffs could define the entire playoffs, but it will be strange. I almost don't know how to react to LeBron James being eliminated in the first round of the playoffs.
It was weird, and then just watching it last night, it was like he's always been like a facilitator, and you just were waiting to say, all right, man, go ahead and take over the game, score 50 if you need to, but go out on your sword. And he just kept passing the ball. So I'm a big LeBron fan. He and I share the same birthday, but injuries or not, hey, if you're playing, you're healthy. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like going forward.
Real quick, Devin Booker, 22 points in the first half. You know, when he first started dating Kendall Jenner, I did not think he was a good enough basketball player to be with Kendall Jenner. I thought she was slumming it a little bit because she had been dating Ben Simmons. And I'm like, okay, Ben Simmons, legitimate NBA All-Star, no matter what we want to say about whether or not he can shoot a lick. Like, the guy's a baller. I get it. And then when she left him and started dating Devin Booker, I thought, he's like mid-tier. And I don't know if it's the reverse Kardashian jinx or not, but I feel like his career has been elevating ever since he started dating Kendall Jenner. And now that the Suns are in the second round of the playoffs, we may start to get a lot of Kendall Jenner in the, we may start seeing her show up at games. She could be the new Carrie Underwood back when Tony Romo was playing, where every time there's a game, she shows up and they would show her. I have this dream, and it probably won't happen, that the Sixers and the Suns meet in the finals, and then Kendall Jenner sits courtside for every one of those games, creating the single most distracting plot line in NBA history, because she cheated on Ben Simmons 15 times, and he went back to her every single time until eventually she was like, yeah, I don't really need you to let me back into your good graces. So there is a budding NBA storyline in the playoffs that if we were to get that matchup, I think it sets up the all-time distracting storyline. Like Ben Simmons playing in front of his ex-boo against the guy that took her from him, that would be fun. Just FYI, I kind of want that to happen.
You've just kind of set up the video when everyone says the sports take start in 5 minutes into it is kind of what you've just have done. Now everyone's going to be like, well, they start actually talking about the Longhorns 5 minutes in.
All right, well, let's talk about the Longhorns. Yesterday, we did a video talking about the Texas. Well, we started off with this idea that we were going to talk about the entire incoming pool of players that are arriving this week. And we spent a lot of time on the offense to the point that we're breaking down the video. So this is part 2 of this idea of who among the guys that just arrived this week, June 1st, players, the remaining high school players and transfers that weren't here in the spring semester are now on campus. And so now we're taking a look at who's showing up and who we think will emerge as potential impact players. There were actually quite a few on the offensive side of the ball. When you looked at Xavier Worthy and you look at Jatavian Sanders, and then there was a Jonathan Brooks conversation to be had. And we even talked about, if you haven't seen the video, go check it out. There's even, I think, an interesting Charles Wright conversation that Texas football fans probably need to just hear and prepare themselves for. But today is about the defensive side of the ball. And I was looking at the list again this morning before, we started doing the video, and there's a lot of when you can, the transfers are, I think, the most obvious ones, right? I mean, those guys have been brought in for the reason of upgrading this team right away. But I think this is, when you consider how hard Steve Sarkeesian has made an effort to try to improve the defensive side of the ball with, I mean, it's almost a running joke now, the number of linebackers they've been going after. They continue to try to find secondary pieces. This is a defensive line class coming in. I mean, as deep as they are there, they still need pass rushers. So I think the pool of players that we're getting ready to talk about, Anwar, I think there's a there's a good number of them that when it's all said and done have a real opportunity when they arrive this week to immediately put themselves into a position where when the games start in September, when they play Louisiana, I think a number of these guys have a chance to be immediate game one impact players.
Yeah, it's clear that when Sarkeesian and their staff got here and they did evaluations, they said, okay, we got to get better on defense. Like the number of guys that they've gone after on defense compared to the number of guys that they really have pursued on offense. I mean, what are we talking about? Like a 2-to-1 kind of ratio? I mean, we'd have to go look at it to be specific. But it's clear that they said, you know, defense, and more defense, and this team has got to get better. And, you know, look, from a defensive standpoint, and again, I don't have the stats in front of me. Maybe I should for a podcast like this. But off the top of my head, Ketch, what was this defense ranked in the Big 12 last year? I mean, were they like sixth, I thought it was 6th or 7th.
And I think there was 7th 2 years ago, and they made one spot of improvement in the 1 year under David Ash. I'm pretty sure they finished 6th.
Yeah, so, you know, it's Chris Ash.
What did I say?
David Ash.
Oh man, I need the weekend to get here. I have not been drinking.
No, you don't drink. So yeah, it's interesting to see, like, and what it makes you think is there's going to be an open competition for a lot of positions on defense. You know, it's interesting. I asked Sarkeesian recently. I asked him, like, hey, after the spring ball was done, have you pretty much kind of solved your depth chart? Like, is most of it kind of done? It's just only like a few little things. And one of the things he said, like, you know, Anwar's not trying to be coy with me, but he still wants guys working throughout the summer. It doesn't really feel like any position is solidified. And for the most part, you would tend to agree with that. I mean, you can't really look at it on offensive or defensive side. I mean, in short, for the most part, Keandre Colborn's not going to lose his job. Yeah, Bijan Robinson's not going to lose his job. You know, those guys are pretty solid, but it does seem like, listen, if you come in right now in the summer, you start balling out, and you start looking good in the fall, like, you've got just as good a shot to start as anyone else, as evidenced by the number of people that they brought in through the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we start, interestingly enough, when we work our way through this group of players, we'll start with the defensive line. It may be the position group we can kind of speed through the quickest, mainly because it's a group full of high school players. So it's a mix. You're not quite sure what you're going to get from a bunch of 17, 18-year-old guys that are showing up. Very few of them very highly rated. But again, and the depth on the defensive line is the strength of the Texas defense at this point. But there are 4 coming in. You've got Baron Sorrell from New Orleans, who was a high 3-star guy that came in as a late addition, having been previously committed to Northwestern. So he comes in at 6'4", 263 in the Rivals database. It'll be interesting to see what he's listed at when he's officially on the roster, and they do weigh-ins closer to the start of, I guess, Big 12 Media Days is probably when that would happen. You've got another flip that they got late in the process, David Abiara. I may not be saying that last name right. I didn't really spend a lot of time. What's that?
Sounded good to me.
May
not sound good to David if that's not the correct pronunciation of his name or anyone in his family, but
I think it's French, and who knows at that point. I did not take French in high school. You've got Jordan Thomas, a kid out of Port Arthur Memorial, who I'm a big fan of, but Rivals only rated as a high 3-star. And then you've got Byron Murphy, another defensive lineman from DeSoto, who's a high 3-star. So you got these 4 defensive linemen coming in. and none of them are really highly recruited. Although I think if I had to pick one guy out of this group, I think Jordan Thomas is the guy for me that has a chance to be that guy. It's funny, he had a picture, a thread was posted on orangebloods.com on Friday morning with Jordan Thomas checking in and some photos of him just physically. He looks like a young grown. He does not look like a high school kid going to college. This is a guy that's been in the weight room. He looks fantastic. And it comes down, can any of these guys get to the quarterback? If they can, I think there's a role potentially for these guys as true freshmen. If they can't, I think it's going to be hard to get on the field this year with the defensive linemen that Texas has, the depth that they have. They're stout. I don't want to say they're big like Alabama, but across the board, Texas has there aren't a lot of tweeners on this defensive line. We're not talking about Joseph Osai making the move from linebacker to defensive end this year, and can he hold up? The players they have along the defensive line are defensive linemen. And so the ultimate question with any of these guys, can they be playmakers to the point where they push themselves onto the field? I have a hard time answering right now. It's not like when we're talking about Jatavian Sanders yesterday at the tight end position, where I know in my heart of hearts that he has the talent to rush ahead to the top of the depth chart. I don't know that about any of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, to kind of figure that, that out, especially when you're talking about young guys. I mean, Alfred Collins came in, but where was Alfred Collins from a ranking standpoint when he came in, Ketch? I mean, was he close to?
I had him ranked as he was a 5-star prospect in a national, for not every service, but he was a 5-star prospect and a national top 50 level guy in some people's estimation. So, he was certainly the guy on the defensive side of the ball last year that I don't want to say there were Bijan Robinson level expectations, but he did bring a lot of expectations to the table, and I think showed flashes of being that kind. Nobody's down on Alfred Collins, but he didn't have a huge impact.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're looking at, okay, well, who can crack the lineup? I'm looking at, a depth chart that Alex posted not long ago and a couple of months ago. And, you had, Jacoby Jones, Moro Ajomo, Keandre Colburn, those are the two inside guys, and Ray Thornton as the edge guy. And then, with how you say his name? Abriera? That was kind of a Spanish. I would Spanish with that one.
What was that?
I went a little Spanish with that. It was the little Florida. I mean, if it was Spanish, so I'm going to say David A until I look it up and get the correct pronunciation of it. As a person who people call me Anwar, I take that, and I pronounce it Anwar. I totally get what he's saying. You got Alfred Collins.
I said Abiara.
Okay. David A. I can't go wrong with David. Alfred Collins behind him, T'Vondre Sweat, and then, you're trying to figure out who could be an edge behind, Thornton. So, that might be something, from the edge position, who's behind Ray Thornton, because I don't know if these guys, I don't see any of these guys coming in and going over Alfred Collins as a backup role. T'Vondre Sweat looked pretty good in the spring game, actually. And, we'll have to see where he's at when it's all said and done. But, T'Vondre looked, pretty good. So, we're really talking about the battle for the backup positions, what these guys can or cannot do. But still love to see Jatavian, to be quite honest with you, on the defensive side to start out before he goes on the to the offensive side of the ball. But I just don't know which one of these guys can be in that, like, that top 2 or that 8-man rotation. Like, it's just hard for me to kind of gauge them, because I knew from Alfred Collins for sure, but for making this big jump, especially in the transition class, there's still a little bit more question marks, and guys I feel like probably need to be developed a little bit more.
I mean, I like Thomas and Abiara as pass rushers. It is, they're guys that on paper could be edge players. But, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that these guys can get on the field occasionally in that role. Like I think both of these guys could be in that position. Really, at that point, it may come down to some of the other players we're getting ready to talk about, which is who they've brought in from the edge position. And one of those would be Ovie O. You talk about last names that, I'm not quite
Oghoufo.
Ovie Oghoufo. When you talk about
I got that one because I interviewed him. So I got that one.
But when we talk about the linebacker position, they do have Ray Thornton already on campus. We know that that's a position they've continued to try to upgrade. But Ovie Oghoufo is OVO.
See, there you go. You understand.
OVO is, look, he was a better player at Notre Dame than Ray Thornton was at LSU, point blank. Ray Thornton was a nobody at LSU, and at least Ovie was a player at Notre Dame on a defense that played in the playoff, on a defense that carried a team to the playoff. This Notre Dame team that was in the playoff a year ago, it wasn't because they've got a high-powered offense in the way that an Alabama or even a Clemson or an Oklahoma or somebody of that ilk might have. They get there playing kind of a different brand of football. And this was a guy that wasn't good enough to be a starter at Notre Dame. And one of the reasons why he transferred is they had a younger player that had essentially was passing him in the hierarchy of the rotation. So he would have been in the rotation almost certainly again this year for Notre Dame, but he wasn't going to be a starter. And I think he comes to Texas to be that guy. And if you ask me, if there is a player on this roster that can emerge as a 6 or 7 sack guy off the edge, I don't think they have anybody remotely close to being better than that. If they've got somebody who can get to a half dozen sacks, I think it's got to be OVO. I really do. And so of all the players that we're getting ready to talk about, and look, we've been waiting to talk about your play cousin, Devin Richardson.
My dude.
Yeah. We've been waiting to talk about him now for 2 days, and he may be the best player of this group. We had the Orange Bloods podcast that we did yesterday, and there is some thought that he might be maybe the best player on this defense. I'm not quite ready to go that far, but it speaks to the lack of proven playmakers on this team, on this side of the ball. And for all the high school kids that we just mentioned, can any of them make a play? And when we talk about that edge position, I think it's a really bad sign if we get to Oklahoma, because Ray Thornton, I can see start in not the LSU game. I can see him start in the Louisiana game. I really can. He's been here all spring. I think that I can see them wanting to at least see what he looks like in a game. But if we get to Oklahoma and Ovie hasn't emerged as the starter at that edge position, I think that's really bad news for this Texas defense, because I don't think Ray Thornton can cut it. I don't think he's a guy that's even going to get you 6 or 7 sacks. And if it's not Ovie, I don't know where it's coming from all of a sudden. Suddenly you're a defense with an edge player who's his job is to come off the edge and create pressure. If you've got an edge position filled by guys who can't make plays, your defense has a massive hole inside of it.
Yeah, this is where I've got to lean on the people who saw him, a lot during the spring, and Sarkeesian praised him. Sarkeesian was very, very high on him. Look, the spring game did not give us an accurate reflection of what Sarkeesian said and what we heard about him behind the scenes throughout the entire spring. What we heard about him throughout the entire spring was he was a baller, that he was a leader, that he was a person that people were gravitating for, that players looked at him and said, man, I don't know who this guy is. Like, what's the hype all about? And then they saw him in practice and said, oh, snap, like he really is that good. So, he's a guy that, again, if I judge him on the sample size of the spring game, like you, I'd probably go, I don't know what the hype is. But everything that we've heard has been contrary to that. So here's the question.
Well, I disagree with that. I disagree. Not when
in
we
what
say
way? Because it was only
when we say everything that we've heard. I didn't hear anybody. I know what Sark has said about him, and I know that you talked to people that said some nice things about Ray Thornton. I had people tell me Ray Thornton looks good in a uniform, but he ain't making no plays. And in the spring game, he looked like $1 million. He looks like an NFL player. He played like just a guy. He played exactly the way he pretty much played at LSU, where he's played for 5 years and really not so much has made an impact. It is the really interesting thing about Ray Thornton is this is a real test of an opinion that you and I share about what Steve Sarkeesian thinks about this roster, which is scrubs in SEC schools on the defensive side of the ball are better than the dudes that are playing in the Big 12, and that includes guys at Texas. They have, and we haven't even talked about Ben Davis, the Alabama transfer, who might as well be a like for like with Ray Thornton, because we're talking about a guy coming from an SEC program that hasn't done a damn thing in 5 years of playing football. And bringing him to the roster, it seems to be saying like one man's trash is another man's treasure. There's like this sense that Alabama's trash is better than what Texas has at the linebacker position, which is why they've been bringing these cats in, and we'll see.
But who in the Texas, defensive side of the ball, on the defensive line, you would say has done a damn thing, and who on the offensive side, as far as the offensive line, would you say has done a damn thing? So I don't think Ray Thornton is going against like gods on the offensive line where you can say, man, he can't get past that guy. He can't do.
But he hasn't been.
So that's why it's potential that he could come in, and maybe he wasn't, the god at LSU, but he in practice where he's going against guys that we've said this offensive line needs help, and I
don't think Ray Thornton gets 3 sacks this season.
3 sacks? He could.
I don't think he gets 3.
How much? All right, let's put a gentleman's bet on that one.
Absolutely.
Gentleman's bet. We don't have to do money or something like lunch or something like that.
Everybody will remember this conversation.
3 sacks.
And hey, look, if Ray Thornton, I root for that kid to be all Big 12, because you and I are desperate to cover a good team.
Yeah.
There's not a player on this team that I don't want to just ball out if it means that the quality of this team enhances. And then come December, we've got like a really interesting, important product to talk about. Like I got no skin in the game with regards to my opinion on Ray Thornton, but I can't fake it. And I just think he's a guy. And I think that they have that guy in a position to start, that he's emerges from the spring as the best option they have right now is a screaming indictment on the shape of the roster. It's a screaming indictment. Because that guy shouldn't be playing football. Neither he or Ben Davis should be playing football right now. They are only playing because COVID granted them an extra year. This is Ben Davis's 6th year of major college football. I think he has 10 career tackles. He wasn't even a really involved special teams player at Alabama. And, and talk about a guy that looks like $1 million. His photos show up this week on social media because he's finally on the 40 acres. And I get it. You can look at that guy in a football uniform and understand why high school evaluators thought that he was a 5-star prospect. But at some point, make a play. Make a play in 5 years. And look, Ovie O has got a highlight tape on YouTube of his best bits from Notre Dame, and he wasn't even like an impact player, but you can put together a highlight tape and it's like, oh, that guy looks good. Ben Davis doesn't even have a highlight tape.
I got to defend the honor of Ben Davis. Like I can't let you shit on a man like that. I mean, he's at Alabama. Like this is creme de la creme. This is the all-star team that they're bringing in, and every year they're bringing someone who's better than the other person was, and every year the next person gets bigger, faster, and stronger. So to Ben Davis's defense, your honor. To Ben Davis's defense, yes, maybe he didn't make a play at Alabama, but damn it, that doesn't mean he can't make a play at Texas. That doesn't mean he can't make a play against Texas Tech. It doesn't mean he can't make a play against Baylor or TCU or Kansas State or any of these other teams.
It's
hard for him to get on the field at Alabama.
I had an Alabama media member tell me that if Ben Davis is playing for Texas, Texas is going to lose a lot of games this season.
But he's judging it on what it looks like at Alabama.
I mean, that's another player that can't play.
But he couldn't play at Alabama. That, again, we're talking about an all-star team. Just because a guy can't crack it at an all-star team doesn't mean he doesn't go, Texas is a level down. I'm sorry, Texas is a level, and you might argue a couple of levels down from Alabama. So yeah, he can't, maybe he struggled up here. Maybe he couldn't cut it here. But if he comes down here to Texas as in the Big 12, it's not the SEC, it's in the Big 12, there's a potential for him to make plays. I'm not saying he all of a sudden becomes the second coming of Ray Lewis and ends up being a first round pick, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden he just can't do it. He sucks. I got to defend I've got to defend Ray Thornton. I'm going to defend Ben Davis. I will not sit here and allow you to be disparaging to those men. I cannot let it happen.
Najee Harris made more tackles last year than Ben Davis did.
Najee Harris was a late first round, second round pick, something like that.
At what position?
I get it. So yes, what happened? There's an interception and Najee makes a tackle. He did it. He couldn't cut it. Look, if you put me out in Hollywood, okay, at a Hollywood party and tell me pull some of the baddest women out of that party, I can try, but I'm probably not. When you put a bunch of Hollywood actors in there, it's the best I might be able to do is the wait staff. Now, put me down at the Domain.
What if you went to Hollywood parties?
And I'll be okay.
Anwar, what if you went to Hollywood parties, like for 5 years? You went to 5 years of Hollywood parties, and not one time did you ever pull a woman. Never get a date, never went home with anybody, never even got a phone number. You can't at some point be like, oh, well, look, did you see that Denzel was here? How am I supposed to get a girl when Denzel's in the room?
But Denzel is there every day.
But if after 5 years you haven't even gone home with a waitstaff member, maybe it's not the Hollywood parties. Maybe it's just you. And there were 25 players on the Bama roster, including the starting running back, who had more tackles last season than Ben Davis did. 25. Najee Harris had 4 tackles last year. Ben Davis had 3. So you'll forgive me if I look at Ben Davis and I go, well, they were just wrong about him. And look, again, he's another guy that I hope I'm wrong about. Nobody was breaking down their door. Every guy that Texas has signed through the portal has been a guy that nobody else wanted. Now, look, we're going to talk about Devin Richardson in a second. He had no other major college offers before Texas offered him, and he committed. And I think that dude's a player. So there's nuance to this conversation. But I'm just letting you know that my expectations for Ben Davis and Ray Thornton are extremely limited. But my expectations for OVO are much higher. And I'm just saying it's a problem for me if we get to October And Ray Thornton is still the starting edge linebacker for this program because I don't think he's good enough Texas doesn't want to have the number 6 defense in the Big 12. It wants to have one of the first or second best defenses in the Big 12. He's not an NFL prospect because
he doesn't have to be.
If he was, he'd be playing in the NFL right now after 5 years of college football.
He doesn't have to be an NFL prospect. And here's what you're saying, but not saying, okay? This is what you're saying, but not saying. What you're saying discreetly on the low is that you don't necessarily think Steve Sarkeesian is good at talent evaluation. Because what you're saying is Steve Sarkeesian was at practice and seeing this guy practice day after day, year after year, for 3 years, right? 1 year as an analyst, and then he got the 2 years as a coordinator. So for 3 years, he saw Ben Davis. And when Ben Davis was on the market, Steve Sarkeesian made it a priority. And Steve Sarkeesian had to give Ben Davis some reassurances that he would be good enough to play. He didn't say, come in here and be a backup. He said, you've got 1 year of eligibility left, and I want you to play on special teams. And Ben Davis said, thank you, coach. Can't wait to come to Austin. He told him something. So if Steve Sarkeesian thought that guy was a jag, if Steve Sarkeesian thought that guy couldn't pull it off, then why would he bring him in here? If Steve Sarkeesian saw Ray Thornton play and looked at tape and says, I don't think this guy can cut it, why would he bring it in here? But what you're saying, without saying it, is that you don't think Steve Sarkeesian is good at talent evaluation because he's got Ray Thornton in there, he's brought in Ben Davis, and you think those guys are Jags. And if you think those guys are Jags, then what you're essentially saying is Steve Sarkeesian's in over his head. And you're saying that in June, when he's been on the job for like 6 months.
Okay. I think you make an excellent point. I really do. And when I get to the end of this, your point will be changed and molded slightly. But
only if I put some vodka in here.
Because you're suggesting, what you're saying is I'm doubting Steve Sarkeesian. And I cannot deny that I doubt some of his talent acquisition at this point. The nuance that I would give that, though, is I don't necessarily think that that's a reflection of Steve Sarkeesian. And I'll tell you why in a second. Because at some point, Sarkeesian does have to try to upgrade the roster. And I think it's more of we've talked about this actually on multiple broadcasts this week. The indictment that's taking place, there's a referendum on Texas football right now. And the question is, how bad does it impact the high school football recruiting and the class of 2022? We've been talking all week long about, we are not that far away from the best high school players in the country slow playing Texas and saying, we want to see it on the field. We've talked all week long about how young these guys at this level have been since Colt McCoy was here. And that a high school senior this year was 6 years old the last time Texas was really relevant nationally. It's definitely been the indictment of there's a referendum on Texas football right now that it is not big time. And when you look at what Texas has done in the portal, they have not been able to compete with the national elite for a single player. I mean, Ray Thornton comes from LSU, but if he had SEC offers, if he had something, he didn't visit anywhere else. Ben Davis apparently had suitors and maybe as many as like 10 offers, but none of them were from major programs. When you look at Devin Richardson, who is the guy that I think we liked the most, he had no other. Texas was his first offer when coming out of New Mexico State. It's not that I don't trust Sarkeesian. There's two elements of this. It's not that I don't trust Sarkeesian's talent evaluation. It's that I think he has found out I mean, they lose PK Nate Ote apparently to Ohio State. That guy was committed to Texas. That guy had told the coaches, I'm coming to Texas. He was a silent commitment, if such a thing in the world could ever exist. But you know what he didn't want to do? Go public. You know what he didn't want to say out loud? That's my girlfriend. He wanted to hook up on the down low and come over to the crib and do some business, but he didn't want to take her to the movie. He did not want to take the chance that somebody would be like, oh, you're with Texas. Texas right now, when it comes to the transfer market, they can't do better. I mean, that is what has been proven. They have not been able to do better. So on some level, Sark has to make improvements to this defense. He's doing the best he can. It also reflects, I think, what he thinks about what he's inherited on that defensive side of the ball in some areas, specifically at linebacker and the defensive backfield, where, hey, you played at Tulsa? You're looking at Missouri? We'll take you. If you're Ben Davis and you made less tackles than Najee Harris last year, we'll take you. Because, again, the idea is that an SEC backup at a school like Alabama is better than what he has right now. And he's come out of the spring, I think, feeling vindicated about, I wasn't really feeling what I inherited on the defensive side of the ball compared to what it is that I saw week in and week out at Alabama, and not just on his team, but who he played against. And look, it's an ominous thing. It's an ominous thing that Ray Thornton and Ben Davis were nobodies at their other schools. They were not rotational impact players. And that it looks like they may be good enough to, at least with Thornton. I mean, we don't know yet with Davis, but Thornton is the starting edge linebacker right now going into the season. I think that's ominous. I think that is, we are not saying that about the offensive side of the ball at every position. And he's not bringing in massive transfers. They've not gone into the transfer market on the offensive side of the ball really anywhere. Although they may soon try to upgrade their stock at running back, with some interest potentially in this Alabama running back. But staying focused on the defensive side of the ball, they're bringing in guys to try to beef this thing up. And the elephant in the room that is unavoidable, and this is not an indictment for me on Sark. This goes back to us talking about Texas football's cachet in the world of college football has dipped. A decade of losing has crippled this program to the point that they don't have a single member of the athletic.com's top 50 college transfers from this season. Not a one. And all of these guys that we're talking about, some of them have more upside than the other, but the reality is there's nobody that Texas could have got that's better. The better players that they've gone for have gone elsewhere. So this isn't about me doubting Sarkeesian's ability to evaluate. What I'm doubting right now is the program's ability to be able to do better. Because it's not like he just can't take anyone. It's not like, because if they don't take Ben Davis and they don't take Ray Thornton and they don't take Ovie Oghoufo, who the hell do they take? There's not anybody else. They weren't getting better players.
So those guys aren't better than the guys that are currently on the roster for even as backups?
Well, I mean, that's what we're about to find out. But I mean, Ray Thornton is starting as of right now. So the answer with that question is shamefully no. No, the program didn't have anybody in place to be better than a guy that couldn't get on the field at LSU. in almost any capacity. I mean, yeah, that's problematic. And it's one of Tom Herman's great failures as a program builder. This doesn't change if Herman was still here. Tom Herman, after 4 years of building this program, look, the quarterback room, pretty good shape. Kudos to Tom Herman. Running back room, Tom Herman leaves it in pretty good shape. Kudos to Tom Herman. Tight ends, offensive linemen. I mean, the Texas coaching staff seems, at least with the offensive line, perfectly happy. The tight end position we think is deep. Wide receivers, that's a position, amazingly, that seems to be less stable than all of that great recruiting that Herman did at that position would seem to indicate it should be. But when you look at the defensive side of the ball, they haven't recruited pass rushers worth a damn. They've developed their big defensive linemen, but they didn't have anybody other than Joseph Osai last year that could make a play, right? I mean, when Joseph Osai couldn't get to the quarterback, Jet Bush was on the field. So it's a massive. So when we look at what's at linebacker and when we look at the depth in the secondary, that falls on Tom Herman. There were pieces of this program that were not adequately stocked with upper echelon talent. And we're watching Steve Sarkeesian show up and deal with this problem. And the problem that he has is, well, damn, Joseph Osai is gone and Jet Bush is still here. And no offense to like Jet Bush, how can we get somebody who's better than a walk-on to rush the passer? And they have not been able to go get guys with better resumes than Ray Thornton, because right now Texas as a program isn't a place that guys that want to go to the NFL and win championships want to go to.
All right.
That's harsh, but real.
All right, let's finish off the rest of the list.
Well, Devin Richardson.
Okay.
I mean, we both think, right? Like that, forget about for a second whether that guy had it, forget about how they acquired him. When I watched Devin Richardson as a freshman at New Mexico State, I'm like, that dude can play. And I haven't seen anybody on the Texas roster outside of DeMarvion Overshown who's been able to show 1/5 of the flashes on the field in games that kid did in his first season at New Mexico State. When he went on the road at Alabama, made 7 tackles, and clearly made an impression on the staff, because if that game never takes place, I have a hard time thinking they know who this kid is. So the only question mark I have about Devin Richardson is he DeMarvion Overshown's insurance or fill in for next year? Is Devin Richardson a year away because he didn't play football? He hasn't had a spring. Is it too much to ask that he comes in right away and makes an immediate impact? And is he essentially too close of a like for Overshown that they both get on the field at the same time? I mean, I think he may be one of the best two. It's like your second best player on the team being a running back this year, right? On some level, it's counterproductive for your second best player to be the guy right behind the guy who's your best, because Bijan's good, so he can be great. So they don't need two Bijan Robinsons. They just need the one they have to perform and be really good. I think it's, in an ideal world, your second best linebacker doesn't, in theory, play the exact same position in this defense as your best linebacker, who is DeMarvion Overshown. If Devin Richardson can show up ready to play, and they're like, God, we got to find a way to get this guy on the field because he's one of our best players. If there's a world where both he and Overshown can play together, I think this Texas defense can be improved in a way that I'm not sure that the edge players that we just talked about can improve it.
I mean, he definitely comes in, if you look at his stats, I mean, I think it's overall, he's got 70 tackles, through 2 seasons, 45 assisted tackles, 25 solo tackles. He's also got about, looks like 2 sacks in the 2019 season and, didn't have anything in 2020, obviously because of the pandemic. So he comes in as a guy who has several years of eligibility left, because remember, last year didn't count towards anybody. So, everybody, and everyone's going to do it differently. So by the way, be forewarned, in this upcoming football season, some people will list people as freshmen who were freshmen, and some people will list them as sophomores and just say, well, if they don't take that final year, it's catch up. So everyone's going to list it differently. It's going to look different. So just be prepared for that. We're all going to have to do a little bit of research, but he's got years left, on him. And he's a guy that, to your point, if he comes in and they say, man, you've just got to keep him on the field because he's just that good, then maybe that defense ends up being that good. I don't see Sarkeesian as a guy who is going to paint himself into a corner and say, okay, well, this guy has to specifically do this and this guy has to specifically do that. I mean, but I could definitely, see potentially DeMarvion at the at the will, maybe Devin at the middle, and Ray Thornton on the edge, something to that effect. Then see what happens at that nickel position as those guys kind of battle it out. I think Adamore and Cook. So, he's a guy that you look at, and I mean, when you look at the depth at linebacker, Ketch, I mean, you once you get past DeMarvion Overshown, I mean, you're talking about Jalen Ford, you're talking about David Benda, you've got Davis that's in there, Tillman that's in there. There aren't a ton of guys that you look at and say, Devin, is going to be hard for you to surpass these people. Yeah. You look at him and go, okay, outside of DeMarvion, who, is playing, but still coming off an injury now. So we still got to see what he looks like, coming off that what is it, the labrum that he had. So, still being able to come off of that. If he's healthy, sure, then he's at the top of his game, absolutely. But once you get past DeMarvion, I mean, it's a coin toss. And if he comes in and he's healthy and ready to contribute, and I think that goes back to Sark's selling point, especially from the linebacker position. I think Sarkeesian looked at it and said, I've got DeMarvion and I've just got some other guys I'm not quite sure of. Benda, I think we look at and say he's a guy that we look at as a player. And there's a lot of question marks, a lot of unknowns. And I think that's why he was able to load up a little bit on the linebacker position and tell guys, hey, man, it's going to be open season. Right? If you can't eat here, you can't eat anywhere. And Richardson's a guy that if he comes in and does, what we think he can do, maybe if it translates on this level, then for sure we start getting to like that back 7 or 8 or whatever the formations are. So we're it's not typically always a 4-man, but when you get to that back 7, at least starting with the linebackers, it could potentially be better than we saw last year.
Yeah, no, I'm very optimistic about Devin Richardson. And if anybody watches this video and is like, man, Ketch was one big, negative Nelly. I don't know who the hell says negative Nelly.
They would just say you're an ass more than likely, as opposed to negative
Nelly. But
like I don't sense that anymore.
Hey, what you get in these videos from us is honesty and transparency, and we're gonna keep it a buck. And I'm not gonna pander and tell people that somebody's good. Like I can't. Like I have doubts. And the other thing is, I know Sark is commenting on these guys, but I just remember Tom Herman showing up and talking about the offensive line like it was a 2014 Ohio State Buckeyes. And we all went, what is he talking about? And it was like, well, he must know what he's talking about. I would love to give Sark some truth juice. I'd love to give Sark some truth serum and then be like, Sark, the guys that you're bringing in weren't very productive at the places that you took them, but you brought them here. What should we read into that? I would love to know the truthful answer, because maybe it is, well, the truth is, you may go to a school like Texas and the 80th guy on the roster is a guy that you say, God, why did we recruit him? And maybe the 80th guy on the roster at Alabama is a guy that you go, if he was at another school, he could play. He just happens to be here, right? Like somewhere in between those two extremes is the reality, whatever it may be for Ben Davis. But I also I would love to know what it is that he really thinks about what he's inherited here, because there are some interesting messages being told. One of the messages, Anwar, as we wrap this thing up, we know they want to improve the secondary. I mean, Caleb Evans is still a guy that they are recruiting. You mentioned it in the war room that we put on Orange Bloods late last night, early this morning. If you just are on the website, Texas, he's gone to Notre Dame. He's looking at Missouri. His ex-Tulsa assistant coach who recruited him to Tulsa is at Missouri. He's looking at Jackson State. I think Texas Tech has their name in the ring. They want to improve the secondary. But as it currently stands, they have no transfers coming in from the secondary, and only Ishmael Ibrahim from Dallas Kimball, who was in that high school class this past year, a Tom Herman recruit that had some off the field issues, got them cleared up. Now he gets to be on campus and participate. That he's the only DB name at this point has to be a disappointment for Herman, because we know that that's a position that he feels like they need to upgrade based on their activity.
I mean, disappointment for Sark?
Yeah, I don't know what I said, but yeah, a disappointment for Sark, because Sark has offered enough guys in the secondary that they just haven't been able to close the deal with. And we know they're still going after Evans. While Ibrahim right now is the only player coming in, you have to believe that probably changes, or that would be a disappointment based on not what Sarkeesian has told us, but what his actual actions in the transfer market would indicate.
Yeah, I mean, Ibrahim is a guy that, that comes in and, has got some speed, to him, but, you look at him as probably a guy that maybe gets in on special teams, but I think he was like I think I saw it 165 or so in high school. So, I mean, that's small. I mean, that's a guy who's going to have to get into, the weight program and really, he's going to have to gain some weight. He's going to to gain some muscle. That's just not big enough for, for college football, so he looks like a guy that's a developmental guy, red shirt type of guy. And yes, they are still looking for cornerbacks in the transfer portal. And if any of those, leaves shake and fall on the ground, they're going to pick them up. So, but right now, from an instant impact from from a defensive side, Ibrahim is not a guy that you look at and say, oh, that's an instant impact guy. You look at, all right, a couple of years down the line and see what Stark kind of can bring in from the secondary, because that clearly has been the position they've tried to upgrade from the many defensive positions they've tried to upgrade, basically linebacker and secondary.
Rank of the guys that we've talked about as we wrap this thing up. Give me your top three most likely in order to contribute to this team of the guys on the list that have just showed up this week. So no Ray Thornton, right? So not including him because he's already taken part in the spring. But of four defensive linemen, we didn't even mention Maury Blackwell, the high school linebacker that I have a hard time thinking he could come in right away. There's like 9 defensive players coming in. So of the 9 defensive players coming in order, the 3 most likely to contribute for you are whom?
I mean, I'll go Devin first. I'll go Ovie, probably 2. The third one's kind of a toss up. I don't know if I have 3, because I've got 2. The third would be, I need to think about that one, because and I'm not quite sure which one of the young guys will have an impact on the defensive line. And I really think once I get to my third one, I'm really talking special teams. Like I think that's what I'm really talking about, as opposed to having an impact, having a defensive impact. I really start thinking it's a special teams. And at that point for me, it's a coin toss.
We're on the same page, 1 and 2. I'm not so sure that Ovie won't end up being one.
Yeah.
Just because the need. I mean, this is a guy that did play last season. Last time OVO played in a game, it was in a national semifinal game. I mean, like if we're keeping a buck, there aren't many guys on this roster that have done that. So I have higher expectations for him. I think he's a guy that really needs to emerge. And look, what I say about Ovie is he wasn't good enough to be a starter at Notre Dame, but that's partly because they has legit NFL guys in front of him. So he is the best case scenario, I think, of a guy like Ray Thornton or Ben Davis, where the thought is, well, he can't get ahead of guys who are second round picks in the NFL, but he can still play. And that's better than maybe what they already have on campus if you're Texas. I think that guy has a chance to be the leading sack guy on this team. Matter of fact, that would be my prediction would be OVO leads the team in sacks this year. And I just don't know what that number is. It 6 or is it 11? Right. And the answer to that type of question may tell us how good of a defense this can be, because if you took they were the 6th best defense in the Big 12 last year. If you took Osai off of it, oh my God, what are we even talking about?
And if you took that Oklahoma State game away, then it's even.
Exactly. My third answer. So we both agree about the top 2. I think Ovie could be 1. I'll probably leave number 3 blank and put a TBA in there and say whatever defensive back Sark pulls in, he's pulling in somebody. They are not, to me, going to come out of this transfer portal without a little depth added in the secondary, whether that's a Caleb Evans or somebody else. But if you made me pick somebody, I'll take Jordan Thomas, the true freshman from Port Arthur Memorial, who I rated as not an elite level 4-star prospect. So he's not in that group that I'm constantly preaching about, but I had him in a tier below that. I think he's a guy that could be sneaky impactful. And if you tell me that in October that guy's getting a lot of reps, then I'm thinking to myself, that's less of a problem and more of that guy's good, like I thought he was, better than rivals thought. I think Jordan Thomas is better than rivals thought he was. And if I'm right, he can get on the field this year. If rivals was right and I was wrong, then that doesn't happen. And then he's a coin flip to ever do it if rivals is right. I think he's better than 50-50 to ever get on the field, not 50-50 to get in the NFL. So I think he's a guy that, of all the high school players that we're talking about on the defensive side of the ball, I have my fingers crossed that my evaluation of that kid and his ceiling is that of a kid that can come in and do something from Jump Street. And physically, he looks the part. Does he have the game? And that is what we're asking about all of these guys to a certain extent. But look, for myself and Anwar Richardson, thanks for watching the video. Spirited little video here. Like at one point, me questioning Sarkeesian's chops as a coach was put on the table. I think it's an interesting conversation. And I will say this, last comment, Anwar, because we've got a gentleman's bet now on Ray Thornton. If when this thing is over with and I end up being wrong and Sarkeesian and this staff ended up making some incredible personnel calls, if I'm wrong about Ray Thornton, if Ben Davis comes in and he is good and he just didn't need to be at Alabama to show it, when it's over with, I will not only fall on the sword and say I was way wrong, because I don't ever have a problem doing that. I'll emerge from it on the other side saying that Sarkeesian is a god of sorts, right? Because if he gets this right in this rich man's ragtag unit, because I don't want to be too rough, because these are guys that are coming from LSU and Alabama and Notre Dame, right? Like these dudes are made program guys. If they come in and they do at Texas what they never did anywhere else, it's a major feather in the cap for both Sarkeesian and the staff, and I'll never forget it. I'll always remember how shaky some of those dudes looked like when they came in. So the rub on all of this is if Sarkeesian hits a home run on this, if this turns out to be a massive home run, I'll remember it forever, and I'll always reference this moving forward. Anytime they make a personnel decision that looks shaky at all, we'll point back to this conversation that we had on this YouTube channel, and we'll say, remember when you doubted him, Ketch, and then he proved you wrong? And not so much he, but his opinion and his foresight with talent that nobody else was targeting. It's a chance for Sarkeesian to, and his defensive coaches, to emerge as significant witches with regards to evaluation, projection, and the ability to land immediate help in places that maybe other people weren't looking for. I've got it all. If I'm wrong, I've got my concession speech ready to go.
You got to make a video. I will do a video with you falling on your sword.
Oh God, yeah.
And maybe I'll even order you a clown nose if that happens, and you can just do it with a clown wig and a nose.
If I'm wrong,
yes,
these dudes are. I don't mean like Ray Thornton starts 12 games and I got to wear a clown wig and a clown nose. If subjectively, when this thing is over with, we go, that dude was pretty. He doesn't have to be damn good. He was pretty damn good.
But you change shit sometimes, because we fought back and forth. I was thinking about this before. It's funny, this morning I was thinking, like, Ketch and I hasn't fought in a while. And then all of a sudden, organically, this has happened. Zach Shackelford, you and I fought about Zach Shackelford for years.
He's just a guy
who was an all Big 12 selection. So we have to have clear parameters as to what you define as good.
Zach Shackelford was the year that he was named first team all Big 12, was the fourth highest rated offensive lineman in Alex's grades. He was an undrafted. That guy started like 40 something games at Texas or whatever it was. He's one of the only 40 something game starters in the history of Texas football that I can think of that never got drafted. Didn't make, I don't think, a practice squad. Maybe he did.
No, he got signed by the Bucks, and then he got released.
He was just a very solid, okay player, and
I'm just saying there needs to be parameters set, because this guy makes first team, and you're like, well, that's still not good enough.
If
so
those
the parameters have to be from Ray Thornton and Ben Davis.
I will run the streets of the Woodlands naked if any of these dudes we've just been talking about are first team all Big 12. Look, Shackelford got in. You know what happened with Shackelford?
Oh, go Ray Thornton. Horrible for everyone in the Woodlands, but go Ray Thornton. It's not
going to happen. Here's the thing, though. I'll be an asshole when it's over with. I can't do it. So I'm willing to put the clown wig on and the clown nose, but when I end up being right about these dudes, can't take a victory lap, because then I'll look like a huge jerk. But I want everybody to remember, I don't want to have to say I'm right. I want all of you, when I'm right, to see me in the streets and just give me the "you were right" head nod. You know, the one where you're like, I want the in the streets head nod. You don't even have to verbalize it, right? I don't want to do the Ketch was right, and now look, he got one right, and he won't let it go. I'm not even going to bring it up because it'll be sad. It'll be sad. But when OVO is starting in October, because Ray Thornton can't get to the quarterback consistently, you guys remember, Ketch was the one that told you he's the guy that I think has 6 or 7 sack upside. I just don't think some of these dudes have anything more than being okay in their pistol. I think that's the kind of lead they're working with. They might be okay, but hey, I'll put on a clown wig, and If Ray Thornton gets to 5 sacks.
Let's go.
5 sacks.
5 sacks.
Clown nose, clown wig. I'll do an entire show in the clown wig and the clown nose. On the next episode after he gets 5 sacks. He gets to 5 sacks in 12 games. The Monday after.
Writing this down.
The Monday after he gets to 5 sacks, I'm wearing the clown nose and the clown wig.
Okay. What if Ben Davis gets 3?
Well, he's not going to be an.
I got the Ray Thornton.
3.
Yeah. Because you don't think he's doing anything.
Well, I think Ben Davis is going to be a depth guy. So I don't think he's going to start for Texas. I think he's going to be a guy that comes in and is a depth guy. I think he's battling David Benda for playing time. And I don't know how to handicap that.
Okay. We'll come up with Ben Davis. I said 3 sacks, but maybe it should be tackles. Maybe I should do tackles. Do you think 25 tackles? That do
25 tackles? I'll do 25 tackles.
25 tackles?
Because that dude ain't playing special teams, so I ain't worried about that.
All right, so 25 tackles, we'll do a video for you falling on the sword with the outfit on for Thornton, and then if Ben Davis gets 25 tackles, same thing. I'm
still kind of lukewarm on that. Like, all
right,
we're not establishing a very high bar. Like 5 tackles for Ray Thornton says to me, Ray Thornton started and played some football. Like, he ain't getting 5 sacks in 3 games. He's going to be a season-long starter to get the 5 sacks.
I hope Ray Thornton goes off versus Rice. Is that Rice? Is Rice the 3rd game? Who's the 3rd game?
Getting 3 sacks. I'll be so pissed.
I hope Ray Thornton's fucking hair is on fire in that 3rd game. Did they play Rice? Is Rice the 3rd game? I totally forget.
He has like 5 sacks against the worst team on the roster. I'll still do it. But I'll talk a little smack at that point. I'll be like, I got the clown nose and stuff on, but that was against the worst team on the schedule.
I'm hoping does it against Rice. Fucking, I'm Ray Thornton. I'm gonna wear a jersey and shit to the press box.
You know what? I'll buy a Ray Thornton. I'll wear, because the thing is, if he starts to get close to 5, he gets to 3 at any point. I'll know. Okay, this could happen. At which point, I will order a Ray Thornton jersey that I will wear a wig and clown nose in. Unless you think—
No, you got to do it the Monday after. You got to do it. You said the Monday.
No, I'm saying I'll have that jersey ready to go.
Okay.
We get to October and that dude's got a couple of sacks. I'll be like, oh, I need to order my jersey just in case.
Oh. And if he gets 1st team, you're streaking naked through the woodlands, correct?
Oh, yeah, I ain't worried about that.
Okay, all right.
There's a better chance of like Big 12 media members getting coked up and drunk and putting me on 1st team all Big 12.
Well, hey, UT, University, this is my parting shot. Someone in the UT video department who has watched this video, you monitor this stuff. And Bianco, I know you're out there. I know you're monitoring us and seeing what is going on. Thomas, you're watching, seeing what we say. Make sure you get the cut up of this. Send this to Ray Thornton and tell him, you know how they sometimes they show the analysts that doubt you, like the Tom Brady stuff.
Hey, Ray Thornton scares me, man. Like, I don't want to be on his hit squad.
No, we don't.
I guess it's a good thing that I moved.
No, like Tom Brady had all the haters and doubters and then he played that video after he won, the Super Bowl. They did the cut ups. Someone do a cut up for Ray Thornton and show it to him. And so Ray Thornton comes out with his hair on fire. So that Catch gets to wear a fucking clown suit. Ray Thornton, you also get to make some money. So give props to you because you'll get paid because that's what you came here for anyway.
At that point, I deserve like a cake or something. Like, if I motivate
too many props. I'm just trying to get something simple that you'll do.
Well, no, I'm just saying if I'm the motivation behind a renaissance for Ray Thornton, then Texas needs to be sending me money, and I'll do videos for everybody. Who do you want me to do a video for? You need me to light a match under an offensive lineman's backside? Just tell me who. You need me to do the Junior Angelau video? I will cut a Junior Angelau promo, and they can have little Ketchum videos for everybody. I'll do one for Bijan. I'll be like, Bijan only had a couple of 100-yard games. He got to prove it. I'll just start saying stuff. But I believe this. I believe it. Look, I don't think that Ray Thornton's a 12-game starter for Texas. I think Ovie O shows up, takes his job. I think there's a better chance that Ray Thornton ends up being third string by December than there is of him being a 12-game starter that performs at a level that would even have him whispered in all Big 12 breath. And that's not just me watching the spring game. That's me looking at 5+ years of college football and the spring game and every conversation that I've had with anybody who's followed his college career from Alabama through Texas, not including Steve Sarkeesian.
Congratulations, Ketch. You have solidified my mod ranking and once again solidified yours. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
It's a good thing there's not a hate button on.
Well, there's a dislike button.
There is a thumbs down.
Make sure you guys don't do it. Don't dislike for me. So, all right. Hey, my laptop's about to die, Ketch.
I plugged mine in like 2 minutes ago. For Anwar and myself, thanks for watching. You guys have a good weekend, man. We'll talk to you on Monday.